Greece collapsed under its own promises. They gave out pensions, healthcare, and jobs, then defaulted when the bill came due. Riots, suicides, IMF bailouts followed. The economy shrank 25% in 5 years. Sound familiar? Because America's now spending twice as fast, with triple the debt. Today, let's uncover why the U.S. is sprinting into the same trap Greece couldn't escape. No economic disaster starts with a bang. It starts with a budget. What's fascinating is how calmly the story begins. One year, the numbers look fine. The next, a single line on a spreadsheet tips everything. What drives this slow-motion train wreck? 6 stages, always in the same order, always with the same warnings ignored. Stage 1 feels generous. Politicians everywhere promise pensions, early retirement, free healthcare, subsidies for housing, energy, or food. In the U.S., Social Security and Medicare expand, quietly building unfunded liabilities over $70 trillion. France sets a 35-hour workweek. Greece lets people retire in their early 50s. In Japan, the government guarantees jobs and support for aging workers. Each country hands out new benefits, believing prosperity will cover the bill. But by stage 2, growth starts to slow. Populations age, birth rates fall, and productivity struggles to keep pace. France's GDP grows just over 1% per year, Japan's even less. The U.S. sees decades of stagnant wages for the middle class. Still, spending keeps rising, on pensions, on health, on interest. The budget gap widens quietly until it can't be ignored. Then comes stage 3. Governments borrow to fill the gap. Greece blows past 120% debt to GDP. France hits 110%. Japan soars to 250%. The U.S. is now over 120%. Cutting benefits triggers protests. Raising taxes risks recession, so leaders borrow, hoping for a better future. Stage 4 always follows. Central banks step in, buying up government debt. The Federal Reserve grows its balance sheet by trillions. The Bank of Japan becomes the main buyer of Japanese bonds. Money is created, not earned. The illusion of control holds for a while. Eventually, stage 5 arrives. Interest payments spiral higher. Greece's interest costs overtake everything else by 2010. The U.S. now spends more on interest than on defense. Investors start to worry, will these governments ever pay it all back? At the end, something always gives way. Currency slides, forced austerity, or sudden collapse. What looks safe at first becomes unstable when everyone finally does the math. To see how these stages play out in real life, just look at what happened to Greece. A small country wins big in 2001. Greece adopts the euro and, overnight, gains access to some of the world's lowest borrowing costs. The dream is European prosperity. But beneath the celebration, a time bomb ticks. Borrowing in euros means Greece gets treated like France or Germany. Credit is cheap, and investors are hungry for yield. Athens seizes the chance. The government borrows heavily, funding massive projects. Olympic stadiums, highways, government buildings. Public wages jump. Retirement at 52 for many. Full pensions, expanding state jobs. Politicians compete to offer more, never less. Few question the numbers. Official data show deficits just above the euro limit, but behind closed doors, deficits run twice as high. Tax evasion is a national pastime. Even doctors and lawyers underreport income. By 2009, Greece's true budget deficit is over 15% of GDP, nearly 5 times the Eurozone's limit. Public debt climbs past 127% of GDP, one of the highest in the world. Reality hits with a vengeance. The financial crisis exposes the scale of the problem. Investors flee. Greek 10-year bond yields leap into double digits, then 30%. The country cannot borrow at any price. The phrase Greek statistics becomes shorthand in Brussels for fudged numbers and broken promises. Greece seeks help. The first bailout in 2010 totals 110 billion euros. Conditions follow: cut pensions, raise taxes, shrink government. Protests explode in Athens, riots, fires, strikes. The Greek economy shrinks by 25%, a collapse as deep as America's Great Depression. Unemployment passes 27%, youth joblessness hits 50%. A lost generation packs up and leaves. In 2015, banks closed. Withdrawals are capped at 60 euros. Suicide rates among middle-aged men spike. Grocery shelves empty. For a moment, Greece stands at the edge of leaving the euro. But a deal is struck. More austerity, more oversight. Greece's story is a warning. The return to markets comes, but the price is decades of lost growth, higher taxes, and fewer young people. Next door, France watches and keeps spending. Imagine a country that feels modern and unbreakable. Fast trains, grand museums, universal health care, and legendary food. But under the surface, France walks the same path as its southern neighbor, only slower, with better PR. For decades, French governments pile on social protections: pensions, healthcare, public jobs, subsidies for everything from farming to theater. By 2023, general government spending reaches 57% of GDP, the highest in Europe. Over half the adult population receives a government check, salary, or subsidy. Nearly everyone has a personal stake in the status quo. Economic growth, however, limps along. The French economy rarely grows faster than 1 to 1.5% a year. The population is aging, pension costs rise, and the workforce shrinks. Every effort to raise the retirement age, even by a year or two, triggers massive strikes. In 1995, a pension reform plan shut down the country for weeks. In 2018, the Yellow Vest movement turned Paris into a battleground over fuel taxes and the rising cost of living. Public debt edges higher. France's government debt moves past 110% of GDP. Annual deficits remain above Eurozone targets. In 2024, France projects another deficit above 5% of GDP. The central government, caught between angry voters and nervous investors, borrows more. The European Central Bank buys French debt in the background, shielding the country from the worst. So far, no leader wants to be remembered for cutting popular programs or triggering mass unrest. The result is drift. France stays afloat because markets believe the euro will hold, and the ECB will step in. But the fiscal gap keeps growing. Economists warn that without reform, the French model faces a demographic wall. France's story shows how political paralysis can sustain a system long after the numbers stop adding up. Everyone waits for someone else to act first. Meanwhile, the spiral continues. Slow, steady, and just as dangerous. Nowhere is this more evident than in Japan, where delay means decades of lost momentum. Japan's story starts with triumph. In the 1980s, its corporations conquered world markets. Tokyo property becomes more valuable than California. Then the bubble burst in 1991, wiping out trillions. A quiet emergency begins, a lost decade that stretches far longer than anyone predicts. The government steps in to cushion every shock. Interest rates drop near zero. Massive public works projects, roads, bridges, dams, sprout up, even in rural areas with shrinking populations. Bankruptcies are avoided. Zombie companies survive on cheap credit. Year after year, deficits accumulate. By the early 2000s, public debt surpassed 150% of GDP. By the 2010s, it crossed 200%. Today, Japan's debt stands at about 260% of GDP, the highest among developed nations. The Bank of Japan invents new policies: quantitative easing, negative interest rates, yield curve control. Over time, the central bank buys half of all government bonds, creating money to keep interest rates near zero. For households, saving money pays almost nothing. For the government, the debt mountain barely registers in annual budgets because the cost of borrowing is nearly free. Growth never returns to the glory days. Japan averages less than 1% real growth per year. Inflation is low for years, but begins to rise after 2021, as global prices surge. The yen weakens sharply against the dollar and euro, eroding purchasing power. For young people, jobs are stable, but opportunities feel limited. The national mood shifts from optimism to acceptance. Japan's choice: stability over dynamism. Riots and political chaos never materialize. Instead, a slow erosion of growth, opportunity, and innovation. The safety net holds, but at a heavy price. A society that gets older, smaller, and more cautious each year. Japan's long stagnation poses a quiet question for America. Is it better to collapse quickly like Greece, or drift for decades, hoping for a miracle that never comes? The U.S. faces its own test right now. Standing at the center of the global financial system, the U.S. carries unmatched advantages: reserve currency status, deep capital markets, and worldwide trust. Yet in recent years, the numbers look increasingly familiar and troubling. After the global financial crisis, then the COVID pandemic, federal debt explodes. In 2025, total national debt crosses $38 trillion, rising by $2 trillion in a single year. That's 124% of GDP, on par with France, closing in on Greece at its worst. The gap comes from layers of promises: Social Security, Medicare, military spending, tax cuts, pandemic aid, and stimulus programs that persist even after the crisis fades. Annual deficits remain around $1.7 to $1.8 trillion, even in boom times. The Congressional Budget Office projects $22 trillion in new deficits over the next decade. For the first time, America's net interest payments on the debt surpass national defense spending, a shift that would have sounded unthinkable just a decade ago. The Federal Reserve stands at the heart of the drama. If it keeps rates high to tame inflation, the cost of debt service grows fast, crowding out spending on everything else. If the Fed cuts rates or buys up more bonds, the dollar weakens and global trust gets tested. Foreign buyers hold trillions in U.S. debt and watch the balance closely. The U.S. enjoys the luxury of borrowing in its own currency and controlling the world's reserve, but those privileges rely on faith. If confidence slips because of politics, policy, or pure market panic, the transition to crisis could be fast. Economists warn that what feels impossible in Washington becomes urgent in markets in the space of a few weeks. America's position mirrors pieces of Greece's collapse, France's drift, and Japan's stagnation. The spiral tightens as promises expand, and the bill for yesterday's benefits arrives faster than expected. Where does the pattern go from here? The answer depends on how honestly the country confronts the limits of its own story. When countries promise more than they can pay, the ending is never a mystery. Only the timing changes. Greece waits until markets demand answers, then endures a 25% GDP crash, youth exodus, and a political earthquake. France floats on promises, hoping the ECB keeps the peace, until a new crisis tests its limits. Japan trades sudden pain for decades of slow-motion decline, buying calm at the cost of growth and innovation. The U.S. now sits at the crossroads, combining the worst temptations of all three: expanding benefits, massive borrowing, resistance to reform, and faith in monetary magic. The lesson underneath is harsh. Every year of delay increases the cost of the eventual reckoning. Politics rewards promises, markets reward math. Reform is possible: raise retirement ages, rethink programs, fix tax collection, curb new promises, but it gets harder the longer leaders wait. The alternative is pain, either a brutal market correction or a slow grind where each generation gives up more to keep the illusion alive. In the end, the real danger comes when voters lose agency and markets take control. Once that shift happens, the story is no longer written by citizens, but by creditors and traders. That point, where decisions move from the ballot box to the bond market, marks the true crossing into a debt spiral. The United States, like every country before it, will have to choose which lesson to learn and how much it's willing to risk for another year of borrowed comfort. Every debt crisis starts with confidence. Every collapse starts when that confidence finally cracks. That's the thread linking Greece, France, Japan, and the United States, 4 very different countries that drift toward the same destination through separate paths, with separate cultures, but identical incentives. When you compare their stories side by side, a hidden lesson emerges. Debt spirals reward delay and punish honesty. Greece steps into the spiral first. Leaders ignore the numbers. They choose comfort over math, expansion over restraint. For years, everything feels stable. Then the facade breaks. Markets turn away. Borrowing costs explode. A quarter of the economy disappears in 5 years. Young talent leaves in waves. Greece learns the danger of postponing reform until markets force it. The bill arrives with interest, and the country loses the freedom to choose its own path. France picks a different road. Instead of collapse, it finds paralysis. The government expands programs until half the population depends on the state in some form. When leaders attempt to adjust retirement ages or trim benefits, protests fill the streets. Trains stop, schools close, Paris shuts down. Each attempt at reform ends in retreat. Debt rises, but no crisis hits because the euro and the ECB absorb pressure. France learns a quieter lesson. Stability built on borrowing can feel permanent, right up until it does not. The tension rises slowly, like water filling a room inch by inch. Japan takes the calmest path. After its asset bubble implodes, leaders choose a soft landing. No brutal correction, no riots, no sharp austerity. Instead, the Bank of Japan buys bonds, supports markets, and maintains near-zero rates for decades. The crisis spreads across 30 years instead of 3. The price is long-term stagnation, weak growth, and a shrinking, aging population. Japan learns that avoiding collapse creates a different burden, a slow erosion of opportunity that younger generations quietly absorb. The United States blends these 3 stories into one. It carries Greece's growing interest burden, France's political resistance to reform, and Japan's reliance on central bank intervention. The mix creates a unique risk, a sudden shift in global confidence. Because the world uses the dollar, any change in trust multiplies across markets quickly. That leads to the real shared lesson, the one none of the countries wanted to face. Once markets take control, the old political choices vanish. Leaders no longer decide the timing, creditors do. And when that handover happens, the transition from stability to crisis becomes a moment rather than a decade. The debt spiral ends when a country regains control or loses it. Every nation in this pattern discovers the same truth. Delay feels safe, right up until the day it is not. When governments lose control of debt, collapse doesn't come gently. It comes fast, loud, and final. Click the next video on your screen. Another story is already starting.